views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to Open BXRX Tuesday, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and today is Tuesday, July 6th. Coming up, we'll give you the latest information on vaccinating kids as the in-person school year approaches, and we'll bust some COVID-19 vaccine myths with Montefiore. Then, the Organization for Culture of Hispanic Origins, OCHO, joins us to discuss their film, Colonization is Extinction, the Puerto Rico SelfDetermination Act of 2021, plans for a Hurricane Maria Victims Monument at Taino Towers, and more. After that, we'll learn more about community land trusts and how CLTs can support community-controlled housing, commercial and retail space, green infrastructure, and more in the Bronx, if we stay in Los Quedamos. And through their 4 pillars of sustainability, community, equity and justice, economic security, and health, the Bronx Community Foundation became the first foundation of the Bronx in the midst of COVID-19 in 2020. Stay tuned to hear how they're continuing to provide resources a year later. So please, stick around. Open BXRX Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BXRX Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. With teens now getting the vaccine and emergency use authorization expected for younger children in the fall, many families have questions about the COVID-19 vaccine for their children. Joining us now to address concerns and share some of those common questions is Dr. Margaret Aldrich, Director of Pediatric Infection Control at Children's Hospital at Montefiore. Welcome, Doctor. It's so nice to have you here again with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sonyi, for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So, to start right in with these questions, a lot of families have concerns about the COVID-19 vaccine, and we're really happy to have you here to help us address some of these myths and concerns. So the first question, Doctor, is how exactly does the COVID-19 vaccine work?
Well, not to get too simplistic, but the way that I explain it to actually to kids when I talk to them about the vaccine is I kind of explain it like if you were going to build a Lego set, you would get a little manual, a little book, right? That would tell you, put this Lego here, and then you're going to build your Lego build, right? So the vaccine is kind of like that. It's the mRNA vaccine. That's what we're talking about because that's what's approved for children 12 and above. The Pfizer right now is the approved vaccine. That's basically, that vaccine is kind of showing your own body the build kit. This is how you build something called a spike protein, okay? And so it goes into your body, it shows your body, hey, I want you to build this, and then your own body builds that thing, and it looks a lot like the spike protein that is on the virus that causes COVID, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So your body builds something that looks a little bit like something on the cover, on the outside of the virus that causes COVID. And then that makes your body make something called antibodies, which we all make when we get an infection. It's how we fight off the flu. It's how we fight off many kinds of infections. It's our own bodies kind of, soldiers, right? You can think of them in those terms. So your body makes something that kind of says, hey, I'm a foreigner, I don't belong here, I'm from a virus, and then your body makes the antibody to fight it. So it's kind of like the vaccine is giving you a little set of instructions for your own body to make something that looks like it doesn't belong, and then that tells your body, now you've also got to make the antibody, okay? So that's how your immune system makes the immunity, and that's how the vaccine works.
Thank you, doctor, for breaking that down in that way, kind of just simplistic. Because a lot of
Sorry if it's too simplistic, but that's the way I think of it, is like it's an instruction manual.
I think it's perfect because through COVID, a lot of people haven't felt that they have access to the information, or they don't understand it because it's overcomplicated for a lot of us who don't know about medicine. So thank you for that. So how was the vaccine produced and approved so quickly? I know that's another question a lot of folks are concerned about.
Yeah, and I do hear that. And I do, because honestly, hasn't it all happened so fast for all of us? Like our lives turned upside down, right? Within the matter of, a few days last spring, all of a sudden everything changed. So I can really understand when people are like, didn't this all happen too fast? Like, I think what I generally explain to people is that the technology we use for these mRNA vaccines, actually, it's been under study for other vaccines for many decades, actually. So we already kind of had, the scientific community already kind of had, if you will, like a blueprint of, hey, we know how to make a vaccine with this technology. And then you throw the pandemic in, and now kind of everything for us in the world stopped, but for the scientists, everybody kind of jumped onto COVID. So if you were doing research in something else, all of a sudden you're only working on COVID. So you can imagine all these people in the scientific community across the world, honestly, kind of put down whatever research they were doing, and everything went into making a vaccine. So when people worry like, oh my gosh, this happened so fast, the vaccine was made so fast, it really was based on decades of research and then human power to just kind of put everything into this, because we knew how deadly COVID was and we had to act fast so that we could save lives, right? So the governments of many countries put money into it. All of the ways that we test vaccines to make sure they're safe for people, all of those things were done. It's just the roads were cleared because this was really a human emergency. And so all the testing, all the appropriate safety measures were taken. It's just that things moved more quickly across nations because they had to, right? Because we had, as we know in the Bronx, we felt it. We had lots of people affected by this infection, and we needed to really act as a society very quickly and very efficiently.
Thank you, doctor. And in that development, were any corners cut in testing the vaccine and developing it?
So that's another question we get. I think what's hard for people a lot of times is they think of, a vaccine gets made and then it gets tested over several years before it, comes to your pediatrician's office and goes into your child's arm, right? One of the reasons that it takes years normally is because you can't get enough people to be participants in the clinical trials, right? You have to have human volunteers to participate. In the middle of a pandemic, there are so many people who can participate in clinical trials because this infection is running rampant through the community. So part of the I think one of the reasons that people feel sometimes this happened quickly and it was approved quickly is because, not because corners were cut. They weren't. Doors were opened and scientists and the governments focused their energy and their resources on this, but all of the safety measures were taken. It's just that all of a sudden you have millions of people who can get this vaccine in a clinical trial when, normally for another vaccine, it would take years to get 1 million people in a clinical trial. You see what I mean? So during a pandemic, you have volunteers and you have lots of volunteers available and willing to participate in that clinical trial. Whereas another vaccine, it would take years to get that number of volunteers to participate and therefore years to show that it's safe. But in this case, we were able to get, not me, I didn't do the research on the vaccine, but the companies that made these vaccines and the governments were able to get many, many healthy volunteers to get these vaccines and to show in a short period of time that they were safe.
Got it. And since we're talking about vaccinating children, doctor, how many children participated in the trials, and did they have any serious side effects to the vaccine?
So there were I'm going to really focus on the Pfizer vaccine. There is a Moderna mRNA vaccine, but that has not yet been FDA approved. I believe it's in process. But the Pfizer clinical trial had about 2,200 kids. Half of those kids got the vaccine and half got no vaccine. They got what we call placebo, which is not the vaccine. And of those children, the most common adverse effects were things like a sore arm, feeling maybe a low-grade fever, having a little bit of achiness after the vaccine. Those were fairly common, and I think maybe more with the second dose versus the first dose. And that's really in line with what we see with adults who have gotten these vaccines as well. So there really were no very serious effects that we consider directly related to the vaccine in that 12 to 15 age group, the pediatric trial. So really, to date now, there have been over 1 million kids. I mean, that's from about 2 weeks ago in the U.S. There were 1 million children, 12 to 15, who had gotten the 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, and we still see that it is relatively very safe.
Got it. Thank you, doctor. So I wanted to share that the WHO recently put out a statement regarding vaccinating children for COVID-19. This has caused a little bit of confusion, especially with schools reopening in September. Doctor, can you help us understand this a little better and what exactly, the confusion was there?
Yeah, I think when you look at the language of the World Health Organization, their statement, so I think that when I read their statement, the language they use is really around urgency, the urgency of vaccinating younger teens, 12 to 15-year-olds, the urgency of vaccinating children. In the US, we do recommend vaccinating anyone 12 and above who can get a vaccine. At this time, we do recommend it. That's the American Association of Pediatrics, the CDC, health departments, really New York Health Department. That is the recommendation because we look at the risk of COVID versus the risk of the vaccine and any side effects of the vaccine. And the risks of COVID in young people far outweigh any risk from the vaccine that we've seen. Now, the World Health Organization is not dealing with one country, right? They are making recommendations for every country, right? That's their mandate. Again, I do not work for the World Health Organization, but when I read their statement, my understanding is they are dealing with many parts of the world that do not have vaccine or have very limited resources, limited vaccine availability. So their job is to say, okay, if you have a child who's 12 or 13 and can get the vaccine, great. But if you have to make a decision between the ill, immunocompromised elderly person, whether they get the vaccine or the healthy 12-year-old gets the vaccine, the urgency is on that older person or on the person who's going to have a higher risk of serious illness with COVID. I do not think they are saying not to get vaccinated as a young person. I think what they're saying is when you're in a place where resources are limited and you have to decide who's going to have the priority here, I think that is really what their statement is addressing. Because remember, the US, we're lucky. We actually have a lot of vaccine, and to the point where we can share with other countries. But many countries don't, right? So the World Health Organization really has to address that issue, right, in a way that kind of tries to be evidence-based and help ensure equity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aldrich, for sharing today. I wish we had more time with you, but I think we got a lot of information out there for our viewers, and you're always welcome back to join us here on BXRX.
Thank you, Sonyi. I really appreciate the time. And everyone, consider getting vaccinated. Talk to your pediatrician for your own child. I think it's kind of the only way that we're going to make it onto the other side of this pandemic.
Thank you, doctor. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scale of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from Bronx, this is
Trans. If you're struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311. Welcome back. This year, New York Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Nydia Velázquez, joined by New Jersey's Bob Menendez in the Senate, introduced the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act of 2021. If passed, the legislation would create a process for Puerto Ricans to finally determine the nature of their relationship with the United States. Here to discuss this and more is Walter Gualterio Alomar, president of Organization for Culture of Hispanic Origins, or OCHO. Welcome, Walter. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Claro, pleasure having you as well. So please, to start, can you tell us about your organization, OCHO, and your purpose and mission?
Well, my organization, we started several years ago, and we are a nonprofit organization that provides cultural, educational, and mental health services to the community. Now, most of the community that we service is basically the Latino community, and we do a lot of work around Puerto Rico and what is currently happening. And we try to educate the community as well as with workshops, cultural workshops, educational workshops. And we just try to keep the community involved in what is currently happening here and abroad.
Gracias. Thank you for that. And, you know, speaking of Puerto Rico, what is the current political status of the island right now?
The actual political status of the island, it is technically a colony. It is they describe it as a commonwealth, but it's actually a colony of the United States, meaning that it is property of the United States. And because of this colonial status, the United States has the ability to determine our future for us. We are not in charge of what is currently happening on the island. The actual government that is in Puerto Rico is just actually a dummy government that is there to manage the day-to-day operations. But at the end of the day, the United States dictates policy, economy, everything from when the hurricane hit the island right up to the economy and the fiscal control board. So we're basically under ownership of the United States.
Got it. Thank you for breaking that down, Walter. I know that there's a lot of disconnect with the diaspora and, the island folks. So I know some of your work involves educating people on what really goes on. And, the fact that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens is something that's not widely known for some reason. And something else I think is a fact, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that Puerto Ricans cannot vote for a president in the island?
That is correct. That is correct. We do not have the ability to vote for the presidency. But yet at the same time, they are dictating policy in Puerto Rico. And also, there's also this misconception about us not paying taxes. We do pay taxes. We do contribute. We pay aside from federal taxes, we pay everything else, sales tax, every other tax, unemployment insurance, and so on, Social Security, all of that, we do contribute to the U.S. economy. But unfortunately, that is a big misconception that is put out there. And people always have this tendency to believe like we're basically like a welfare state. We're just looking for handouts. We want to just take from the U.S. while not getting anything, while not giving back anything in return, which is a total misconception. And that's why you have like a lot of the current issues that's currently going on.
Got it. So there is a division between the 3.2 million U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico who call for statehood versus those who call for independence. Can you help us break down what the difference is between the two and which one you advocate for and why?
Well, the island as a whole is the 3.2 people in Puerto Rico are not actually crying out for statehood, but there is a majority portion of the population does want statehood. And the independence issue has been growing in Puerto Rico because people are realizing that under the U.S. rule, the island has been suffering. If we want anything from the United States, we basically have to ask permission for it. I believe in freedom. I believe in independence. Based on the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States, look where we're at, $72 billion in debt. The electric grid is antiquated and needs to be replaced. COVID was also a crisis. So at the end of the day, because we are U.S. citizens, you have to ask the question, how do you judge a country? By how it treats its citizens. Well, look at the treatment of the people of Puerto Rico and what they've been suffering. And there's your answer. We can no longer stay under this regime where we continue to be property of the United States and allow them to dictate policy on the island.
And as we mentioned, Walter, earlier, U.S. Senator Bob Menendez, alongside U.S. Representatives Nidia Velázquez and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, recently introduced the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act of 2021. What exactly does this act propose, and do you believe that it's a step forward for the island?
To be quite honest, no. The two bills, there's two separate bills. One is basically to become a state. The next bill is an option to become a state or to become a free nation. Now, because in that second bill, it asks to become a state as well. Basically, what happens is if we were to go with that bill that has the opportunity to become a state or to become free, we're still under that same regime. It is not a bill. Let's say it's not straightforward. It's not okay. Bill A says become a state. Bill B says become a free nation. It's not very clear like that. It's basically spinning our wheels, basically doing the same thing. For me, I do not support that bill. I believe if Ms. Velázquez and Ms. Ocasio believe in independence for Puerto Rico or self-determination, they do not show up at the United Nations decolonization hearings, which was just this June 18th. They're not there. I was there. I spoke. I spoke on behalf of the people of Puerto Rico and what we believe is best for the island. They were a no-show. No Velázquez, no Ocasio, which leads me to question what their motives are. If they believe in this self-determination, if they believe that the people of Puerto Rico should have a choice, then they should be present at the United Nations when these hearings are live.
Now, Ocho has a film titled Colonization is Extinction. Can you tell us more about this film and what people can expect to find out with this film?
Yes, the film, I directed this film, I wrote it, and my wife helped produce it several years ago, right under the Obama administration, just before he passed the Promesa Act. Now, the film Colonization is Extinction is about Puerto Rico and the economic crisis, and it breaks down the history between PR in the United States, right from the time of Columbus, right up to, like I said, when Obama signs the Promesa Act, and gives you everything in between. So it tells you what has happened between Puerto Rico and the United States, which many people are unaware of. They didn't know that it used to be illegal to fly the Puerto Rican flag in Puerto Rico. They didn't know that they sterilized over 30% of the women in Puerto Rico. They didn't know about the Jones Act. They didn't know that if you spoke Spanish in school or if you taught Spanish in school, you could be fired. So there were many different things that are going on in the island. They're unaware about the bombings of Vieques from 1945 into the 2000s. And that island today still has the highest cancer rate in all of Puerto Rico. And they're still fumbling around with the cleanup to this very day. So it breaks down all this history and it puts it all together. And it shows you what the current history is and the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States, and why we believe independence is the best thing for the island.
Now, Walter, why do you think there's such a divide in education between Puerto Ricans living in the diaspora versus what happens on the island? Do you have an idea why that happens?
Well, I was out there in Puerto Rico right after the hurricane because I was a lineman by trade. I was out there for almost 3 months living out there. And when I spoke to the community, I was talking to them about the history between the island and Puerto Rico. And it's not really taught in schools. It's really not talked about in the Puerto Rican, in the schools in Puerto Rico. And at the same time, we also have this Stockholm syndrome. We believe that we cannot operate without the United States. You know, we went from one slave master to another. First, we were under the rule of Spain for several hundreds of years. Then when 1898 rolled around, the United States stepped in, and we went from one property owner to another property owner. So we've been in this state where we just been owned, and everybody has been dictating our future to us for the last 500 years. So the idea that we could be free and self-sustain and self-manage just becomes unthinkable. And it's a very terrifying thing for people to try to grasp.
Got it. So there are plans to commemorate the victims of Hurricane Maria with a memorial and community meeting space here in New York City. Can you share more about this monument?
Yes. I'm part of the Taino Towers board, which is a community in Spanish Harlem. And it consists of 4 towers, and it has a senior center and charter schools. And we have decided to put together, a monument to honor the 4,645 that perished in Puerto Rico because of the hurricane. So this is basically what it would look like. This is the image of the monument. This will stand 13 feet tall, about 5 feet wide, and this will be at the senior center at Taino Towers. It will be outdoors. So what we will be able to do is every year we can get together, congregate at the site, light a candle, we say a prayer, have a few words, and then celebrate some bomba, some plena, some live food, music. And we can do this every year to honor our victims so that we can make sure that that no one forgets what has happened in Puerto Rico and all the deaths that have occurred. So this is something that we could possibly do every year and continue to do so from this point on.
I love it. And I think it's a beautiful, stunning monument. And I hope that, people come by once it's erected in Taino Towers. So without further ado, Walter, how can people find out more about Ocho, your organization, also watch the film and support these efforts at this time? I know there's also an effort to support the monument as well, no?
Yes. So if anybody wants to know more about myself or what it is that I do, you just go to www.theocho.net. If you want to reach out directly, you have my email, theocho.net@gmail.com. There you can actually purchase the mini monument, which basically we're using these to help raise funds to pay for the monument, which we plan to erect on the 4-year anniversary of September this year. Si Dios quiere, if everything works out, we'll have this monument erected at Taino Towers for the 4-year anniversary. And people can come down. We want people to come down, and we want people to get in to get involved. Also, you can purchase the film at on the same website, the same email. You reach out to me. I sell the film for $15. So, and it's a 45-minute film. It's an easy feed. It's an easy watch. It breaks down everything to you pretty quick. And we're also available to do private screenings and Q&A as well, so I can answer and take questions from the community to let people know what is happening.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias, Walter. Thank you for joining us today and talking about this important topic and Puerto Rico as well.
Thank you for having me. And, it's been a pleasure.
Of course. Likewise. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday. Welcome back. In a recent poll by Data for Progress, 69% of voters support the mayor investing in affordable housing by partnering with and providing grants to community land trusts. Here in the Bronx, We Stay Nos Quedamos is actively seeking to establish a community land trust, or CLT, to support community-controlled housing, commercial and retail space, green infrastructure, and more. So what exactly are CLTs? Joining us now to discuss this and more is Jessica Clemente, CEO of We Stay Nos Quedamos. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Of course. So to start, can you just tell us about We Stay Nos Quedamos and your mission?
Sure. Nos Quedamos is a 28-year-old community-led, driven organization that was responsible for the transformation of Melrose as we know it. And it was all driven and designed by fellow community members. It embodies community planning. It's the epitome of what happens when the community sees its future, envisions it, and can actually put in place mechanisms to transform the space. So what we have is a 35-block that encompasses affordable housing, affordable home ownership, 12 community gardens by way of open space, a 1.6-acre park named after our founder, Yolanda Garcia. And it's been about a fight of environmental justice, about equity, about sustainability, and how we, the people, are the experts, and how we, the people, can design and determine a sustainable community.
Thank you so much for that, Jessica. So as we mentioned, NQ is part of the New York City Community Land Trust Initiative. What exactly are community land trusts before we delve into more of the facts?
The land trust, a community land trust, is a way where you split, right, the land and the building on top of the land, and you have it as two separate entities. And what you do by doing that is you're creating ownership for the community, and you're using that as a mechanism to stave off real estate speculation. You're taking the economy out of that dialogue, that process, and really start grounding it in a way to keep generational succession, generational pride and commitment that it's not just in the land and in the ownership, but what it does, it supports families that, like in keeping affordability and permanent affordability, keeping ownership and home ownership. So let's say if it's not in a land trust and you have a home and you sell it, what's to say that the person who purchases that home won't transform it into a space that now disrupts the affordability in the community, creates as of right housing that is market and now starts to price out families in the community, right? Like I think concretely you using those examples through the lens of land trust makes the understanding of a land trust a little bit more understandable, because if you just try to talk about it from a purely transactional standpoint, I think that's where it becomes removed. It's flat to me. How I define it, it's changing the narrative and community around ownership. It's preserving affordability. It's creating the path to create the generational wealth that we want to see. It's also for us in Los Quedamos, and the way we've been incubating our respective land trusts is looking at resources in the community. It's looking at inactivated spaces. It's looking at how do we look at ownership around communications via broadband and creating a broadband mesh network here in Melrose. It's through utility and looking at solar and solar energy and how we could then be in control and own our own solar energy, so that what we're creating in this community is a self-sufficient, self-sustained community that is resilient. And I think that's really where we start changing the narrative around, how do you build community and continue to sustain? And it's, again, it's building on the legacy of Los Quedamos, is looking at how we started, how we got here, and how we continue to leverage the tools of planning and land use.
All right, thank you, Jessica, for breaking that down for us. I know a lot of folks, don't often understand how CLTs work and how the community can actually work to make a more equitable community alongside nonprofits such as We Stay Nos Quedamos in the community. So we have an image that we want to share on 3 steps of how CLTs work exactly. Can you help us break that down?
Sure.
And we can show it on screen. Yeah, there it gets. All right.
Mm-hmm. So first off, it's about what are the problems communities are facing, and how are we looking to take a tool like community land trust to address and solve those problems. What are the problems? Displacement pressures, lack of job opportunity and prosperity. How are we creating and keeping cycles of entrepreneurship and cooperative movement building within the community, so that we're not just, creating jobs, but we're creating jobs that are meaningful, that stay in the community, and therefore the cycle remains within the community. Now you look at the tool of the land trust and you kind of take it into the planning, right? And the land use and how do you now say this tool in creating ownership for the community is more sustainable because the community is invested in keeping permanent affordability, preserving affordability. And so there's not this interest in, hiking up rents or not working with families who, are struggling and can't make ends meet or need that extra support in purchasing their first home and really kind of building up home ownership opportunities. So you go from that stage to then how does it look at the end? Community land trust, I should say, is not a new concept. It is not a new model. It's been practiced and proven for many, many years. I mean, this is a new concept for us now because there's just movement building across the city and creating these emerging land trusts, but each are very different and unique in its own right. And so there's not a one cookie cutter approach to how you could use this tool, which is why I think it's what's so unique and special about it, that you can use this tool to address those specific crisis in your community, which brings equity, right? Which brings balance, which brings that community ownership, that and pride that says, you know what, we need to make sure that we heal, we are activated, and we are able to make the changes necessary to provide for our community to break cycles of poverty. So that could look like many different things. It could look like protecting small businesses. It could look like, really supporting homeowners and creating, safety nets for affordable renters so that there's no displacement pressure. In our respect, we're also looking at it through the lens of environmental justice and social equity. And how are we creating resilient communities around, having the right infrastructure in our community, right? Like we know from COVID that broadband and broadband access is not a luxury, right? Like this is something that is very important and pivotal to not just learning for our children, but to health access through telemedicine. Like it's now really proven to really be a critical, essential utility that we need to really look closer at, not just getting access and building access, but now really looking at how do we own that access and how do we make sure that those who have that access can really create the career paths that need folks like us in it. Folks like us are people of color, women, those that have not had these traditional careers open up to them. And similarly with solar and solar energy, community solar, and what does that look and how does that, support families and offsetting the burden of having to cover that utility, and so it's really how we're looking to use a model of community ownership, I would say, and not just get stuck in land trust, but it's community ownership and how we're defining community ownership in our respective communities.
Right. And even during COVID, I, wanted to add also all the garden spaces that have become, closed or not accessible to the community can also be leveraged through a CLT, So, this all sounds like ideal, but what's next? I know that recently Nos Quedamos joined other organizations in rallying for CLTs at City Hall. Can you tell us what took place at this rally and where community land trusts stand on a legislative level?
Yeah. Well, first, the rally was to secure funding, right? So clearly we're all nonprofits. We're all, really struggling to ensure that we hold the line and keeping this funding viable so that we could continue to grow and develop our respective capacities, because what's next is the community building, it's the community education, it's the organizing, and it's the investment for the community to feel like they have the adequate capacity to be able to lead land trust forward. Right. And so it's stewarding in some respects, it's incubating what we're doing with the seed funding that we've received through City Council. And what I say by seed funding, it was a nominal amount of funding that was created to establish a CLT learning exchange of 10 organizations, of which Nos Quedamos was one, to learn from other established CLTs nationally and internationally, right? To get kind of lessons learned, to understand how each group is responding to their respective communities' needs and how the land trust kind of forms to address those needs. And then now, once that funding has been completed, we've been continued to get, we got another round of City Council funding, and now with COVID, it's in jeopardy, right? Because we need to make sure that the city understands that land trust and the land trust movement is not just a fad. Like this is a community solution that's community driven, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If we're really serious about equity and long-term sustainability, then community groups and the community have already defined what that looks like. And so there needs to be a commitment on part of City Council to invest, not fund, but to invest in that, because it's going to take multi-years. And I've said that during the rally today. Funding for CLTs is not, you're not going to establish a CLT firmly in one funding cycle. Right, like it can't be. You can't see this work in funding cycles. We have to see this work as multi-year, multi-generational. It's an investment. It's really about creating the path forward by way of funding, but then the next stage is legislation, and how are we creating policies that support community-driven CLTs and mission-driven nonprofit developers in getting access to RFPs in the beginning, and creating the systems and the tools and opportunities so that we can be prepared to respond to RFPs when they come up, and be able to put together a development team that will surely, support and address the needs of the community.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us today and sharing more about community land trusts in our community.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
For folks at home, if you want to find out more about community land trust and the movement to make this happen in our communities, you can visit nosquedamos.org or nyccli.org. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday. Welcome back. At the height of COVID-19, the Bronx Community Foundation became the first and only foundation in the Bronx, providing much-needed resources to vulnerable Bronx residents and businesses. Joining us now to share more are no strangers to BronxNet, Desmon and Derrick Lewis, co-founders of the Bronx Community Foundation. Welcome back, gentlemen. Great having you both back.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So for those who are just tuning in, can you tell us more about the Bronx Community Foundation and your 4 pillars?
Sure. Well, Sonyi, appreciate the opportunity to be here as always, and thank you for what you're doing for our community. So the Bronx Community Foundation, as you mentioned, really actually was started a few years ago. You know, Desmon and I, being born and raised in the South Bronx, and also being supported by nonprofits in the Bronx, knew that we wanted to give back to our community. And we started to think about ways to be more unique with regards to the way we can give back to the community, to uplift and to help and support the great nonprofits, small businesses, and other organizations that are doing great work in the community. And so we came up with the idea of the Bronx Community Foundation really to be an opportunity for us to provide greater number of resources and capacity to enable and uplift the great programs, the great resources, the energy of the nonprofits, small businesses, community leaders, et cetera, in the Bronx. And when COVID-19 hit, we created the Bronx Community Relief Effort, which is an initiative of the foundation, really to provide resources, to provide additional capacity to organizations in the Bronx. And the foundation has really 4 key areas of focus. Economic security, which is focused on ensuring that Bronxites, have the resources they need from, either access to high quality and high paying jobs, access to money that they may need. We've given out micro grants. But also ensuring that they have the ability to prosper through workforce development training.
Thank you so much.
I was going to go through all 4, but yeah, we could. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead, Derrick.
So community is really focused on ensuring that we're providing, resources around housing stability, resources around ensuring that Bronx organizations and individuals are collaborating and working together. When you talk about our focus on equity and justice, we want to ensure that we provide a fair and just environment for all Bronxites to live, and making sure that we're providing the resources to ensure that our Bronx community is fair and just and equitable. And then our final pillar is focused on health. As you know, the Bronx is one of the most unhealthiest parts of New York State, and ensuring that we're providing, health-related resources, but also, we've been focused on food insecurity as an area of focus for us as a foundation. So ensuring Bronxites have access to healthy food, produce, etc.
Thank you so much for that, Derrick. And early on last year, we spoke about Bronx businesses receiving only 1% of COVID-19 loans, and our youth also struggled with remote learning through the digital divide. I know that these are two systems that you helped and you stepped in for through the Bronx Community Foundation. How did you step in to address these two issues, and how did you move quickly to identify these areas of need in our community?
Sure. So small businesses, starting with that, is really the lifebloods of our community. As many people know, the Bronx is a small business economy. And so we have a number of very, very important small businesses that keep our residents employed, but also keeps our economy going through commerce and other related activity. And so knowing that we are a small business economy, we went right to partnering with organizations that we know are already doing great work in the Bronx to support our small businesses. Organizations like the BIDs, 3rd Avenue BID, Fordham Road BID, Jerome Gunhill BID, Westchester Square BID, to name a few. But also organizations like the new Bronx Chamber of Commerce, organizations like Sobro, and many other institutions that are doing great work in the Bronx to support our small businesses. And so we brought all of those organizations together in different aspects to try to support our businesses, from providing direct grant funding to keep our businesses open and keep our residents employed, but also technical assistance to help our small businesses survive, whether it's legal support, rent support, marketing support, all of the various sort of wraparound services that we know our small businesses need. And so at the height of the relief effort, we were out there meeting with small businesses, providing direct non-recoverable cash grant funding, and working with BIDs and other small business institutions to really understand the needs of our small businesses and try to come up with solutions. And then on the youth and digital equity side, one of the most apparent things that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic was the fact that we have a major digital divide in the Bronx. And many of us knew that. My brother and I grew up in a digital desert. And so we knew the challenges of not having digital equity, meaning access to the internet or access to digital resources. And so first it became apparent when our youth were being sent home without a means to school from home, meaning no digital resources. But then as a part of our relief effort work, we noticed that in every area of need, whether it's small businesses, whether it's housing, whether it's nonprofit support, whether it's food, digital equity and the lack of digital equity across the Bronx hinders all of these different areas from progressing. And so we, with our partners like DreamYard, Perscolis, the Knowledge House, The Point, many, many others, we came together and we created the Bronx Digital Equity Coalition, which is a group of organizations that really have already been doing great work in the Bronx around digital equity. And we focused on distributing Chromebooks and MiFi devices. We distributed over 2,000 Chromebooks and MiFi devices. But longer term, we're working with grassroots institutions to really build out a digital equity plan for the Bronx to try to solve, the largest digital desert that we have in the entire city, which is in our community, and try to build digital equity across the Bronx.
Thank you so much for that, Desmond. And, I do want to emphasize that, as Derrick and Desmond mentioned, they are not new here in the community. They were born here in the South Bronx, and they're giving back to the community in this way because they were able to also leverage, how nonprofits in our community help them in their success as well. So something else a lot of folks may not know about the Bronx Community Foundation is that you also help restaurants create outdoor dining spaces in the South Bronx. Particularly in my community here in Willis Avenue, I've seen, all these facades here helping our communities like the Puchi Frito, leverage their customers. So can you tell us more about the goal behind this revitalization?
Yes, absolutely. As you know, many parts of New York City have been afforded the opportunity to really be able to move from, serving New Yorkers inside to moving outside and being able to create outdoor spaces to continue to serve New Yorkers. The Bronx is one of those places that really hasn't had a great opportunity by and large to provide outdoor dining to our residents. And so we partnered with the 3rd Avenue BID to really provide outdoor dining spaces, to your point, near Willis Avenue, but also on Alexander Avenue in Mott Haven as well. And this allowed for our restaurants to be able to actually serve our Bronxites outdoors. But what it also created was an opportunity to have people gather in a place, where we weren't able to before gather inside. be able to gather outside, with COVID restrictions withstanding, to be able to meet and sort of continue to congregate and create sort of this opportunity to continue to interact with each other. When frankly the last 14 to 16 months, it's been very isolating for a lot of our Bronxites. And so, our outdoor dining capability, had multiple different impact areas. It allowed for our restaurants to continue to stay open in those neighborhoods, but also allowed for our Bronxites to really be able to have a place to come and sort of congregate, communicate with each other outdoors, and really be able to have an opportunity to continue the vibrant activities that our borough is known for.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So often when we speak about relief and underfunding in our community, a lot of people don't talk about the long-term solutions, but that's something that the Bronx Community Foundation is addressing. You mentioned the tech equity and how we can kind of move forward and not have this issue with tech disparity in our communities. As Bronxites yourselves, can you share your hopes and visions for moving the Bronx and our people forward while ensuring that people can also stay and thrive here without having to leave the borough?
Absolutely. So fundamentally, our vision is that we have many great institutions, grassroots organizations that are already doing the work in the Bronx. Many of them, as you said, we've benefited from growing up in the South Bronx. And so our vision is to really build the capacity and partner and really build something we call community power to uplift the organizations already doing the great work in the Bronx, to then build long-term sustainable solutions to help eradicate some of the challenges that we face. And a couple of examples, we already mentioned the Digital Equity Coalition. We're also building out a food sovereignty network. This is going to be a group of grassroots food organizations, pantries, food entrepreneurs, urban agriculturalists, to really come together and build solutions to grow locally, but also build solutions that are longer-term sustainable so that we can continue to fight this food desert that my brother and I grew up in, but it's pervasive across the Bronx. When you look at our equity and justice focus, we have an Equity and Justice Advisory Committee, which is a group of organizations that focus on legal aid, but also just supporting our system and involved family members who really need the support longer term, right? So we're not just providing short-term solutions. We're working with organizations, again, who've been fighting this battle for decades, to really bring long-term sustainable solutions, innovative solutions to the table. And that's in every area of focus. In our housing area, we are focused on bringing a collaboration together of affordable housing institutions to look at rent stabilization and other things, to provide a funding and the support our affordable housing organizations need longer term. So, 2020 was really a focus on immediate relief. Now what we're doing is we're taking some of that learning with our partners and we're building longer term sustainable solutions to continue the work, but with a vision really to, build a digital oasis, not having a digital desert, build a food oasis, not having a food desert, looking at vibrant housing ownership, looking at a fair and just Bronx rather than sort of currently, a Bronx that isn't focused on fair, equitable, and just. And so those are some of our vision statements and some of the things we really want to achieve over the next several years.
Thank you for that, Desmond. Thank you, Derrick. Thank you both for joining us and sharing more about the Bronx Community Relief Effort and the Bronx Community Foundation in general. I also want to emphasize to our viewers, this is why it's important that we get involved civically and we vote, and we enact change in our community alongside, leaders like Desmond and Derrick as well, who are trying to work together collaboratively with our community and stakeholders in the Bronx. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Of course. Before we go, how can people stay in touch and learn more about the Bronx Community Foundation?
Yes, we encourage you to visit our website, which is thebronx.org. It's thebronx.org. We also encourage you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is @Bronx Foundation, and Facebook, you can search for us at the Bronx Community Foundation. We also encourage you to reach out to Desmond and I directly. You can reach out to us at info@thebronx.org.
Thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. Well, that's all for our show today. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.